I remember hearing the quote, ready, fire, aim, which implies that we're acting before we have all the planning and preparation done. So what you and I get to do in this video is put together a design regarding what we want the FortiGate lab topology to look like. And then once we have that design in place, we'll follow through in implementing the details regarding that design. So for our lab environment, let's go ahead and have a firewall. We'll call it firewall 1. And that can act as the external firewall between our headquarters network and the public internet. And then internally, we can have some additional firewalls as well. Let's have firewall 2 here and firewall 3 here. And also, it's very likely we want to practice some VPN work, so we could also put another firewall that's available on the public network. We'll call that firewall 4. And let's put in some networks. So I'm going to put in some clouds that represent networks. And in a lab environment, those could be implemented as layer 2 switches or private networks, or even layer 1 hubs would do it. And let's go ahead and put some connectivity there from firewall 1 and also from firewall 4. And then they're going to be connected to their local networks as well. We can draw that as a line here, or we could put another cloud. Either way is great. And then let's imagine we have a network here that's common for firewall 1, firewall 2, and firewall 3. We'll put some IP addressing here in just a moment. And then behind firewall 2, we could have some other networks. So we could either draw those as clouds or lines, either way. We might have a demilitarized zone, so we could put a network up here for that. And one of the critical components of our lab environment is to be able to go to these devices and manage them. So let's also connect each of these devices to a management network. And for the benefit of reachability, I'm going to put all these green connectors, which are going to represent ports on the firewalls, to the same local network here in my home office. So I'm going to call that M for management. And we'll add IP addressing here in just a moment. So everything off to the left of this interface here on the firewall. For IP addressing, let's go ahead and use the 10 address space. So for the second octet of the 10 address space, for this network segment right here, let's use 10.123 because we're connecting firewalls 1, 2, and 3 there with a 24-bit mask. And then behind firewall 2, let's go ahead and use 10.2.0.0 with a 24-bit mask. And behind firewall 3, let's use 10. Any guesses? 10.3.0.0. And that way, when we see those networks, we'll know exactly where they live. And on this portion of our network right here, off of this interface on firewall 1, let's use the address space of 172.16.1.0 with a 24-bit mask. And that way, if we put servers or other devices on that network segment, we'll give them all the network of 172.16.1 with their individual host addresses on those devices. And in our lab environment for this address space, let's use 23.1.2.0 with a 24-bit mask. We can imagine, for example, that our service provider has given us that IP address space to play with. And the default gateway at the service provider is .1. We're also going to need to implement that access to the real public internet in our lab environment. So I'm going to refer to this as our pseudo internet access, and then I'm going to put another cloud here to represent the real internet. Now the challenge is, if we have a host that ends up here at, for example, 10.2.0.50 or some other IP address on that subnet, and it's using firewall 2 as its default gateway, and then firewall 2 is going to forward it to firewall 1, if that traffic is intended for the real internet, we need some connectivity and also some network address translation to make that work. So here in the lab environment, here's what I propose we do. Let's put another device right here between our 23.1.2 network and the public internet. And right here we can do NAT and or PAT that can take traffic from 10.2.0.50, for example, and then swap it out with a routable address as it forwards it out to the public internet. And then as the replies come back, that device will do the untranslation of that traffic and then forward it, hopefully, if it works, forward it back to our client. Now, regarding this NAT-PAT device doing the translation between our lab network and the real internet, that device could be a FortiGate firewall. Absolutely could, because firewalls do a great job of doing NAT and PAT. And that would be its sole purpose right there, is to allow all traffic, but just do the translation between our internal play network and the real internet. Another option would be use a tool like VYOS, which does a fantastic job, and there's lots of great documentation for it regarding implementing network address translation and other routing services. Or if you're really comfortable with Cisco and you have Cisco in your EVNG environment, you can use a Cisco device. An example of that would be using a Cisco router, providing that NAT-PAT solution. Or if you're a Juniper fan and you've got Juniper in your EVNG environment already, you could use Juniper gear. So we have some options for this device. And as we go to implement it, I'll walk you through my choice regarding this list based on what I have in my EVNG environment, and I'll walk you through the configuration as well. So let me finish up with the IP addressing. We have 10.123, 10.2, 10.3. This pseudo public internet is 23.1.2, and then the real internet is everything else. And then over here at firewall 4, we can have it also connect to the 23.1.2 network in our lab. And then over here behind firewall 4, let's use 10.4.0.0/24. And then let's also plan on some consistency for our IP addressing for host addresses. And for firewall 1, let's use the last octet as always being 71, no matter where it is, whether it's the interface connected over here on the 10.123 network, or the interface connected up to the 172.16.1 network, or whether it's connected over here to the 23.1.2 network. Let's use .71 as the last octet. And that way, when we see that IP address, we'll know exactly who owns it. And let's follow that same logic for firewall 2. We'll use .72 as the last octet, and for firewall 3, .73, and for firewall 4, you got it, .74. So let me take a look at our topology real quick. We also had to plan out exactly which ports on those firewalls we're going to use as they connect to those respective networks. So let's start with the management interface. Let's use port number 1 on all these firewalls for the connection for my management network. And my management network in my home office here is 192.168.1.0 with a 24-bit mask. And the default gateway is at .1. So I also have a computer sitting on that same network, and that'll make it really easy to manage all these firewalls from that management network. So I'm going to label the firewall 4 also as port number 1 connecting to that management network. And then as we build the lab, we'll just make these connections happen. And then for the connections facing the more trusted networks over here, firewall 2, let's use port 2, port 2, port 2, and port 2 for those connections. And let's use port 4 for the connections that go out to the less trusted networks. So from firewall 4's perspective, that'd be this one. And from firewall 1's perspective, it'd be this connection here. And from firewall 2's perspective, it'd be this one. So it's going towards the lesser trusted network. And also same concept here on firewall 3. So let's do a quick double check to make sure we have all the details. We have 4 firewalls we're going to implement. We're going to have a device that we're going to use for NAT and PAT. We've identified all of our networks here in yellow. We have the last octet that we're going to use also in yellow. The first port is going to be used for management for all the firewalls. And then ports 2 and 4. Oh, here we go. This guy right here needs a port 2. And we have 1, 2, and 4 in use. Let's use port 3 on the firewall connecting up to the demilitarized zone. And then on our NAT/PAT device here, let's use this guy as .1. And for the other side of that, we can use DHCP. And what's happening with this device, NAT/PAT device, behind the scenes, it's connecting to my home network. So it can get a DHCP address and also a default gateway and then forward correctly out to the internet. So although we're doing NAT/PAT here, my home network is also going to be implementing NAT/PAT as well for the outbound traffic. And then when the reply traffic comes back, my home network is going to untranslate. And then my NAT/PAT device here in the lab is also going to untranslate as it forwards traffic back to our clients. So what I'm going to do is take a screenshot of this, and I would encourage you to do the same if you want to go back and refer to it. And then as we go through building the lab together, we'll just implement the components based on this lab design. In addition to just downloading the FortiGate software, we also need to train our emulation environment, in this case EVE-NG, to be able to use that image as part of a lab experience. So in the next video, you and I get to take a close look at the integration between the FortiGate virtual machine software and the emulator EVE-NG. So I'll see you in the next video in just a moment. Meanwhile, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.